Okay, we'll try this again. And again and again and again. Okay, as I was saying before what this is really a blend of what we've been doing in the Song of Songs with the weekly Torah portion, with Shavuot. And I think you'll figure out why, because I'm going to review a little bit about the 4 winds that we studied in the Torah portion. And then I'm going to go into the Song of Songs, chapter 2, verse 1. And then I want to pull it back again to why in the wilderness. Of all the places to give us the Torah, don't you think, it just makes common sense. He would take them all the way to Jerusalem, take them up to the Temple Mount, and we could just establish everything from that point forward, and everything would be, in our minds, perfect, neat, and we don't have this cloud of people wandering around in the wilderness. Why would you give the Torah in such an empty, humble, hot, dry place? But the good news is, if he can give the nation of Israel the Torah in such an empty, hot, dry, deserted place, then he can certainly give us the Torah wherever we are. That's good news. So we'll try once again. And for my class, I know that we're overlapping here, and I think this is how we got misnumbered last time. But for the class, this will be Song of Songs lesson 32. In case I forget, somebody out there can remind me. And so we're just going to call this Gathering Roses in the Sinai Wilderness. And just to review what we did in the Torah portions this week, we talked about how this particular Torah portion, Bamidbar, it's always going to fall before Shavuot. And as Rabbi Lux was saying this morning, that our next one, Nasa, will always fall after it, so that you're going to have Bamidbar and you're going to have Nasa as bookends of not just Shavuot, but in terms of helping you have a complete context for what goes on at Mount Sinai at the giving of the Torah. These 2 Torah portions will kind of be like brackets. When you're reading something, it'll put something in brackets for you to draw your attention to it. So these 2 Torah portions, they're like brackets. And one thing they have in common, even though Nasa really is much longer and has a lot of different topics in it, what you'll notice they do have in common is that both of them discuss the 12 tribes in relationship in Nasa to the Mishkan, the gifts of the 12 tribes. But in this Torah portion, Bamidbar, they are being numbered for war. And that's why I just love telling people, if you're going to study prophecy, please don't start with the book of Revelation and Daniel. Please go back to the beginning, and that'll give you context. When you're reading about the 144,000 among the 12 tribes that are sealed in the book of Revelation, it only makes sense to go back to the Torah portions that have a little bit more extended treatment of the 12 tribes. Obviously, you'd want to go back to the blessings on the tribes, but maybe a Torah portion like Matot, which literally means tribes. If you're looking for information on the tribes, where would you start? Tribes. If you have kind of a summary, that's why I encourage people to make yourself little note cards for each Torah portion that summarizes or bullet points of what's in that Torah portion, because if you had a note card on this particular Torah portion, you would have a bullet point that says, oh, the 12 tribes were numbered for war. And so when we get over into the book of Revelation, as we will at the end of this, and it goes from the angels holding back the 4 winds into the sealing of the 144,000, it's lost a lot of the mystery by that point, because you know where it started. It's going to start right back here. They were numbered for war right here. They were gathered into this great cloud of witnesses in the wilderness. And so then when it follows and it discusses with us how the woman is taken into the wilderness to be nourished for time and time and half time, she's like, oh yeah, I've read that before. That's in the Torah. So I have a pretty general idea of what's going on in the book of Revelation. It's just a little Torah, and it's up to me to figure out how it's kind of out of sync from maybe the chronological order that I'm used to reading it. So we're looking at Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, and it commemorates two significant things. Obviously, the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And in this Torah portion, it specifies, not just in the first verse, but in the first phrase of the first verse, it says that Adonai spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. So you're not supposed to think about the Ten Commandments just in the context of Mount Sinai. You're supposed to also see that as a wilderness for a particular reason, or he wouldn't have thrown the word in there. There's no random words in the Torah. Every single one of them means something. And in certain cases, this is I want to show you how the Hebrew scholars can sense the wordplay in the original language, and maybe all of a sudden a rose isn't a rose is a rose. Maybe a rose is more than a rose. And so as the fourth feast, we can see that it's the axis of the menorah. It's the axis of the seven feasts. So if you're looking at it as a chiasm, then you can see that everything hinges on the giving of the Torah at Shavuot, whether you're talking about Passover, whether you're talking about Sukkot, or anything in between those. The theme of the giving of the Torah goes out to all seven of the feasts. And of course, the layer there agriculturally is going to be the first fruits of the wheat harvest. And that's why it's traditional to read the book of Ruth on Shavuot. It takes place between the barley and the wheat harvest, the same way as the black horse is riding out in Revelation. He's giving you the price of the barley. He's giving you the price of the wheat. He says, don't touch the oil and the wine because it's not time for it. That time is going to be at Sukkot. It's going to be in the seventh month. So he's giving you a GPS where you can line your brain up and say, okay, I know exactly what time this is. That whatever this black horse rider is doing, it's within this time period. But it also signifies authority. When you look at the number 4 in scripture, you can almost bet your bottom dollar, if you're looking in context, it will have something to do with authority. From the beginning of creation on the 4th day, the sun, the moon, and the stars were put in place to govern. Okay, good. Now go all the way to the book of Revelation. You go to the 4th assembly, the 4th assembly is Shavuot, and it talks about authority. I will give you authority, just as the Father has given me authority, I will give authority to you. So nothing changes in between either. He doesn't move stuff around on the table, so we can try to figure out what he's doing. He's very consistent when it comes to these patterns. So we're commemorating not just the first fruits of the wheat, but the giving of the Torah. But we know it is tied. We know that Passover is not really tied up until we get to Shavuot. And in Leviticus 23:11, it tells us we're commemorating the wheat harvest and then offering the 2 loaves at Shavuot. Where's the origin of that? All the way back at Pesach. In the Pesach week, we're going to offer the first fruits of the barley. And you're going to count 7 perfect weeks up until Shavuot, where you'll offer the sheaves also, or the 2 loaves of the wheat. So for the barley, he says, he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord for you to be accepted. On the day after the Shabbat, the priest shall wave it. Now, on the day when you wave the sheaf, you shall offer a male lamb, 1-year-old, without defect, as a burnt offering to the Lord. That's first fruits of the barley. There's going to be a waving of the sheaf. I want to look at the waving because I want to review those 4 winds right quick. So you count forward, and it takes you into the first fruits of the wheat. In verse 15, it says, you shall also count for yourselves from the day after the Shabbat, from the day when you were brought in, from the day when you brought in the sheaf of the wave offering. There shall be 7 complete Shabbats. or Shabbatot. So he's not just saying, yeah, you remember when you brought in the barley. He wants us to remember that the sheaf was waved. When he repeats something, it's to add emphasis. And each one's going to have its own special position in terms of determining what is our context. So it's the waving that's a repetition. So I looked to the commentary, Vayikra Rabbah, to this particular section concerning why does it have to be waved? I mean, isn't it enough you just bring the sheaf in, this is yours, God, and, we'll leave it here and we'll go on. Now we can go have barley. But there's a symbolism to everything that's going on in the temple because it's reflecting something happening up in heavenly realms. We were never supposed to see the temple as simply a physical earthly service. It's always to show us that we are the parable. We read parables and we think, oh, that's a parable. But from his perspective, he's the reality. And we're just the parable that reflects the reality. Like I said before, it talks about God's hand. And we say, oh, that's an anthropomorphism. God doesn't have a hand. And I say, but no, you got it reversed. He's the one who really has a hand. All I've got is the parable of a hand. I can look at my hand and I get a little bit of a perception of what his hand does, but he's got the real one. I've got the reflection. So if we look at the wave offering, it's a reflection of something happening in spiritual realms. And so, the rabbis are always good to give credit where credit is due. They tell where they're quoting from. It's a good academic practice. Get you out of trouble with copyright infringement. It says, the priest moved it forward and backward, upward and downward, forward and backward, to symbolize that the act was in honor of him to whom the whole world belongs. Upward and downward, to symbolize that the act was in honor of him to whom belong the regions on high and the regions below. The movements forward and backward were to counteract the effect of injurious winds. And the movements upward and downwards were to counteract the effect of injurious dews. Right? So that's what we spent our class this week talking about, the four winds. What is it about these four winds? Because they're all through Scripture. They're causing either trouble or good things from Genesis to Revelation. So it makes sense. We would want to find out, at least have our little, like I say, in our note card, I want to at least know what each of these four winds does, both good and bad. Because if they're being held back in the book of Revelation, I'm curious about that. That means I have to go back to the beginning. This gives us a little bit of an idea. And like we were looking at in class, how these four winds affect the earth, how they can bring blessing, but they can also bring chaos, absolute chaos. If you've ever been in a tornado, if you've been in a hurricane, a typhoon, if you've been in a blizzard, anything like that, it's going to affect meteorological. I didn't think I could do it, but I tried. Meteorologically, it's going to affect what's happening in the earth. And we know that the weather does affect what happens to people. And if we were sailors, we would know way more about winds, trade winds, prevailing winds, all sorts of currents and things. But we have here within the camp in this Torah portion, 4 divisions of 12 tribes. You're going to have a tribe on each side, and they're actually facing. I know we think of them looking in toward the Mishkan, but this census is for war. And we know it's a reflection of the divine chariot based on the standards that they're carrying. And so the encampment that we look at, the picture, and we've all seen the pictures of the encampments around the Mishkan, we tend to, see this beautiful, peaceful, little light coming in, a little smoke coming out of the Mishkan. Everybody's in their tent. But the census says they're being prepared for war at this point. And so for each of these tribes, even though they are protecting what's inside them, their faces are to the outside if it reflects the divine chariot, because it says the chariot can move in any direction without turning. And so while if they were going to journey, Judah would move first. They would see the clouds start to move. If the Levites saw the clouds start to move, they would go pack up the Mishkan. They would get the ark on their shoulders. And then when Judah sees the ark start moving with the cloud, then Judah sets out. And everybody, as we encamp, Brianna, so shall our journey be. Who thought of that for our Sukkot t-shirts? I don't know, but they're awesome. I wear them all the time. But it just reminds us, the more organization in your home, the more organized you're going to be on the road. That's an everyday application. But their organization was to be maintained as they moved. And now that they're numbered for war, if a threat comes in, any side can face that threat. There really is no behind, as long as they are on point, on alert, on guard, on watch. What happens when Amalek comes up, it's understood that the people they attacked were not those within the clouds of glory that formed like a wall or a fence around the tribes. Outside the camp would be the people who were causing trouble. And they said it wasn't even a matter of you have to kick them out for causing trouble. It said the cloud would just spit them out, which would, make you think twice about complaining. But apparently, learning curve problem. They just kept complaining. But you could get spit out and be outside the clouds of glory. Also the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude that caused the trouble with the golden calf, they were said to be outside also. I don't know if the remnant that was left after Moses executed the judgment, if they were still not happy or what was going on, but they were said to be out there too. So if an enemy did come in, they'd attack them first, because aren't you going to attack the stragglers before you attack an organized army who's facing you and ready for you? And I don't know that they even could penetrate into the cloud of glory. I think the Israelites would have to go out to war. But those for the standards, remember, each tribe has a flag or a degel. And then they're set in divisions of 3 tribes on each side. So one of those tribes in that division will have an additional degel or standard, a flag, and it'll have a symbol on it. And those symbols reflected what we see in the divine chariot. On the east side, facing for us, Jerusalem, you're going to have Judah holding a standard of a lion. So his standard and the divisional standard are going to be the same. And this particular standard, this particular direction, because of the wind, is associated with the angel Gabriel or Gabriel. It says, Gabriel, blow your horn. I'm not sure we're ready for that because that east wind can bring some unpleasant things in scripture. Remember, it's associated with the plagues in Egypt. So the wind can bring either a blessing or a curse. It depends on truly the people. The people are interactive with the winds. And so the encampments of the Israelites are going to affect how the winds blow. That's a lot of power, guys. Yeah. If your behavior can affect how the wind blows around the world, then it was important for them to keep the covenant. Then on the south side, you have Reuven. He's going to have a red degel, and there's some controversy over exactly what the symbol was, but the agreement is whether it was the root of the dudaim. I think today it looks like a fleur de lis, like the lily, but it's said to have been the dudaim that Reuven gathered in the field. Others say it was the picture of a man, but they say that the roots of a dudaim also have the appearance of a man. So the agreement is that it had a man-like appearance. this is associated in the south with the angel Michael. We've got a black degel on the west side, and that's Ephraim carrying that particular standard. It's going to have the image of a bull, which reflects the house of Joseph. That particular west side is associated with the sons of Rachel. And so they're associated on that west side with the angel Raphael. And then in the north, there's a sapphire degel, and Dan, or Dun, he's going to have a tribal standard of a serpent, but his divisional standard will be the eagle. And some sources say that it had more of an appearance, what we would call a winged dragon, kind of a blending of the two. But for sure, it had an eagle-like appearance. And that's in the north. And that's associated with the angel Uriel. And we might say, well, that's just a bunch of garbage. It doesn't say that in the Bible. No, it doesn't. It doesn't give you the specific names of the angels. But in the book of Revelation, it does tell you there are 4 angels holding back 4 winds. So are these the particular ones? We don't know 100%, but it's a pretty good guess. If they guess that there's 4 angels holding back or controlling 4 winds, then, their guess on which ones they are could be good too. Plus they're, spoken of in the book of Daniel. You can read that and see where they're deriving that. So let's think about tribally what we're seeing. In the north, Dan with an eagle for his division. In the south, we've got Reuven with a man for his division. In the east, we have Judah with a lion for his division. And then in the west, we have Ephraim holding the bull or the ox for his division, each with a face, a military face, and 4 directions, 4 winds. So in Exodus 19:4, it says, "You yourself have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." Okay, now remember, we have to think beyond the physical realm. He'll tell you something that we associate with a physical thing, but you're always being asked to lift your eyes and think higher, think in a more spiritual realm. He says, "Now therefore," and I'm skipping some verses in here, you'll notice, because I want to get to the point. "Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine." How much of the earth does the 4 winds cover? Do the 4 winds cover? All of it. And all the earth is his. But it's a particular standard. He says that blew them into the wilderness. And he says eagle's wings. And you know which standard had the eagle's wings. He says, "You shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak unto the children of Israel." So Israel is going to receive the Torah at Sinai. And then we have problems with the golden calf, and then the firstborn forfeit their priesthood, and then the Levites have to redeem them, and a clan of the Levites become the priest, and then the Levites take over that support service, which we would think displaces the participation of the 12 tribes within a priesthood, even though they've been called a kingdom of priests. Like, okay, they just lost their priesthood. What happened here? They didn't. You can see it's still in effect right here. You'll be unto me a kingdom of priests. But now what's happening is he's facing the tribes out into the 4 corners of the earth, into the 4 directions of the 4 winds. And he says, as the Kohanim are priests to Israel, now Israel, the 12 tribes, will become priests to the nations. Does that make sense? So you're still in it within a kingdom of priests. And the clue here, how I bore you on eagle's wings. Remember, the eagle, degel, eagle degel. Try saying it really fast. It's just fun. Eagle degel. It's in the north. Don's in the north. And by the way, Don disappears in Revelation. Something going on there. The tradition is that King Mashiach, King Messiah, is hidden in the north. They say he is going to be in a dormant state before the final redemption. He will have to be awakened. In fact, that's what we looked at yesterday. We looked at Yeshua in the boat on the water and why he had to have a pillow and why he had to say the things that he said and why the disciples had to say the things that they said, because it was a prophecy going all the way back to Jacob and his pillow. And Yeshua had to demonstrate that he could control the four winds in order for them to understand at that moment that he was King Messiah. It said that the north wind was left incomplete and that the Creator said that anyone who thinks he is God, come along and complete the north wind and you will know who he is. Pretty cool, huh?
Yes.
And so Yeshua rouses himself from his dormancy. And he says, oh, you have little faith first. You're like, that would have been me. Like, okay, I'm not trying to be faithless, but I feel like we're all going to die, Could we do something here? And so he says, peace, be still. And then they remark, who is this? That even the winds and the sea obey him. And they were on the Sea of Galilee, which is called the Sea of the Nations, or the Galilee of the Nations. So he's on the sea that represents the nations, and he says, peace be still, which tells you that the chaotic winds had to obey him. And then I showed that little video we took at the Sea of Galilee when that weird dust storm blew up. And that's the day that I quit making fun of disciples in boats, because that was scary to see that thing blowing. So the Israelites are about to receive the Torah. They've been reminded that they were brought in on eagle's wings. They were brought in with the effects of a north wind, which can bring, those of you that heard the lesson, the north wind's going to be responsible, and this is all from the perspective of Israel, no other nation. It's going to be responsible for the floods, the flood type rain, the hail, and heavy snow. Right, so it's waters, but they can be injurious waters if they come on too strong, if they're unbridled, or they come out of season. Any of these winds can be not a blessing if they come out of season. If you need rain on your garden, you don't need dew, right? And you don't need an east wind. The idea of tornadoes. You think about the chaos of that wind. It gives you an idea when that it's thought that it's obedience according to the covenant, which is why we just read that. If you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, you can affect the entire earth. And that's why I say there's no mini mitzvah. Every single commandment you do can be affecting things in heavenly places, and you have no idea. You just thought it was just, I didn't even think about that when I did it. I didn't even think about that when I obeyed God. It's just what I do. It's who I am. And he's saying, but it's not a mini mitzvah. You're affecting things in heavenly places. And it's looking right now like we need more people heeding the covenant because there's a lot of turmoil in the winds. So the eagle's wings was symbolic that he had borne them on the wings of Mashiach, that King Messiah had carried them into the wilderness because he's also in the north. So that eagle standard being associated with King Messiah, it's going to be considered his hiding place, if that makes sense. But it's from the north. They say that he will have to be aroused from his dormancy. He will go dormant for a period. But when it's time for the exiles to come home, that King Messiah will be aroused from his dormancy. And now that thing on the boat makes way more sense. Galilee of the nations, the sea of the nations, and Yeshua saying, peace, be still. I can control these winds, and I am perfectly able to call these exiles home. But first he had to send out 12 disciples. So the symbolism, I don't think, was lost on them any more than it's lost on us. One of the earlier types of Messiah did come from the tribe of Dan, and that was Samson. Very strong. He was a Nazir, had the long hair and so forth. But he's also remembered for judging the Philistines pretty harshly. And so for each of these types of Mashiach, see, even Absalom, he even had characteristics of Messiah, even though he was a little rascal. But you can pick out events in the lives of these people in Scripture, and each one will give you some seed of truth to help you build your understanding of Messiah and what his work will be like. For Samson, coming from the tribe of Dan, number one, it's okay, the north wind of Mashiach. And when Mashiach does arise from his dormancy, he will be seen as kind of the avenger, not the cartoon character. The way that Shimshon dealt with the Philistines in his generation, that's supposed to give us an example of how Mashiach will deal with the bloodthirsty nations when he returns from the north. Of course, as they camped, each one of these tribes was supposed to balance the other. If a certain tribe was strong in one area or had a blessing in one area, then a tribe next to them may not really do well in that area, but they would have a different blessing. And you notice that he did split up Shimon and Levi. That was a dangerous duo. So if there were dangerous duos, just like in a classroom, first day of school, Noel, you go alphabetical and adjust from there. Because we don't want Big Daddy and Jimmy sitting next to each other in class. Or the bus. It can be a problem. And so that did. It balanced their military forces so that there was no side that would be weaker. And that's exactly what has to happen with the winds. Remember, this particular encampment of the tribes is teaching us something about the four winds. And therefore, it's teaching us something about the divine chariot and its four faces. And so in the divine chariot, there's perfect discipline. It's like a lightning flash. It's like chashmal. It says in Ezekiel, chashmal in modern Hebrew is electricity. It's that fast. It's not like fire, aish. It's way faster. And so the second that the Holy One would issue the command, it's like they're gone. And they don't have to turn because they're already facing that direction, like the encampment of these four tribes. But that's the picture for us. When we function in our spiritual calling, there's an organization, there's a preparation, and the second something happens, we're ready to move. We don't have to sit down and talk about it and say, well, I would rather be over here in the east. I like the lion picture way better than the man picture. It just looks like, man. I don't want the man. I want the really strong lion roaring. Or maybe I want to be out west over here. I'm a bull. I'm strong. People always want to argue about what they're called to do. There's no arguing here. You're assigned. You're assigned a place, because on down the line, we'll get to a Torah portion called Korach, where even though he is a Levite with a very important job, he decides, I'd rather have the priesthood. And so as for us, we might be, out here assigned with the tribes. We've discussed that before. Are you one of the tribes, or are you, I don't know who I am? It still says you assign them territory within the tribe. So knowing where you are, you might look in at what the priest is doing and say, oh man, I'd rather do that. And he said, no, you're already a priest. I made you a priest. I gave you a calling, function in that, and there will be organization, there will be harmony, and these four winds can move across the earth in order to bring blessing. He wanted to bless the earth. How is he going to bless the earth? Through the tribes. And you, all the families of the earth, will be blessed. So I need you to hear and obey the covenant in order for these winds to respond. Your obedience is going to go up. You know how I learned this, I think, in 5th grade. It rains, the water goes down, and then there's evaporation or something, and water goes up. And then it gets in a cloud, and somehow water comes back down, and it just goes up and down, up and down. Okay, that's the way this works. You could explain this to a kid. What were these 12 tribes doing? It's like water. The blessing comes down. They absorb the blessing. They're obedient. It sucks the water back up when they're obedient. And then the clouds can drop the blessing at appropriate places and times. So there shouldn't be any bewilderment in the wilderness. We know what to do. But the fact that it's placing us at Sinai, the encampment, he wants us to remember the wilderness at Sinai. He's reminding us that to receive the Torah was not to keep it within those clouds of glory in this little bitty spot. The idea was your obedience will instead be a light to all the nations. It will affect all the nations. And this is why you need to hear and to obey. This is how you're going to be the light of Messiah. The same eagle that brought you here, you can send out to the nations. And as it concerns this cloud, Exodus 19:7 says, so Moses came and called the elders and people, set before them all these words, which the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And that released the light. Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, behold, I will come to you in a thick cloud, so that the people may hear when I speak with you and may also believe in you forever. Then Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. So it's interactive. It's going back and forth, that you get the rain now. The rain goes down, the water goes up. The rain goes down, the water goes up. And so the way they're interacting with this cloud is the way that the world is now going to interact with its clouds, that blessing is going to go up. So now we still want to know, why in the wilderness? Why couldn't this have happened on Mount Zion? Why couldn't this have happened on Mount Moriah? I'm not going to tell you yet. I'm going to skip. I'm going to change a channel. It's going to look like I'm changing the channel, but I'm not. Song of Songs 2:1. It says, I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. And again, that translation of these flowers, there's going to be a lot of discussion, but in general, there's agreement. A rose is a rose. So this is where I was saying that sometimes those who understand the language, especially the biblical Hebrew grammar, I'm pretty good with modern Hebrew grammar, but I have to resort to the experts for the biblical grammar. It's a little bit different. And so once you understand that biblical language, what you realize is that there's all sorts of wordplay going on in the text. In fact, had we read that poem in Hebrew, it would have had way more. Yeah, and assuming we could actually speak Hebrew with rhythm. So, yeah, but you can see that if you do read, especially in the prophets, sometimes it's very poetic. Not just songs or the Psalms. It's very rhythmic. It's very easy to read in Hebrew. But what will build in a text, and this is hard to explain to people because English is, I can't use that word we used to call it as English teachers, but when you're trying to teach students grammar, but for every rule, you have to teach them 2 or 3 exceptions to the rule. I before E except, after C, or when sounded like A as in neighbor and way. It's just, so it's like it's completely arbitrary. But in Hebrew, there's intent with certain letters that it'll say what it says in the literal sense, but you could actually read a secondary meaning just because of the grammatical structure. So the original text, and those of you who have seen inside our Torah scroll know this is true. If you've opened it up and taken a look, you can see that if you don't already know what you're reading, it's a challenge because it's all smushed up together. Yeah. And you're fortunate to get a chapter break in some cases. When you're looking, if you're going to read your portion in the Torah and you're trying to find your place, it can be a challenge just because of the way it's smushed together, and it's really hard to read it sometimes. That's why you have the pointer. It helps keep you on the right line. So as the words are smushed together, if they're reading them like this, you can see how easy it was for them to maybe split a word at the wrong place and say, hey, wait a minute. That's interesting. If we split it there, because you're not dealing with a lot of vowels, and it lets you do some things that say, wow, that's deep. If you add that understanding to what the literal text says. I am a rose, or I am the rose. In Hebrew would be Ani chavatzelet. Chavatzelet. Chavatzelet is the rose. Okay. I am a rose. Ani chavatzelet. How many of y'all remember the song of the Arava? Yesasum, midbar v'tziyah, v'tagel, tagel arava, v'tifrak, kachavatzelet, v'tifrak, kachavatzelet. So you hear in there, chavatzelet. If you were to split that word, instead of saying chavatzelet, you said chavtzelet. You divide and make a new meaning. You say, Ani, I am she, and I am beloved. I am sheltered. Tzelet would be the shelter, the shadow. But if you know a little Arabic, you might have heard, or even in Israel, you'll even hear Israelis calling one another Habibi. Habibi. If they say Habibi, it's a compliment. It's your beloved. Hey, sweetie, Hey, precious.
Like, hey, baby.
Yeah, it's not hey, baby. You might get a different response if you said hey, baby. But it does. It means somebody's beloved. And so it would become Ani chaviva. Ani chaviva. And so it would go from I am a rose to I am she and I am beloved and tzelet, sheltered. And this is kind of the explanation of why Israel was chosen from all the nations as their ministering priests. We know the tradition is that at the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, that the invitation was gone out all over the world. In the 70 symbolic languages of the world, they were all offered the Torah. And among all those nations, there was a remnant who said, we will do and we will hear, but not the whole nation. Only one nation as a nation said, we will do and we will hear. So they received the assignment. And eventually that assignment would be to gather that remnant, to gather them in. As one nation, they agreed to do and to hear the Torah. And so she became beloved and she became sheltered at Sinai. But this is where we get the idea of the tribal priesthood, the 12 tribes themselves becoming priests to the nations. And we know that the Mishkan itself was built with elements of the Garden of Eden. It's a little creation. We've done a class before where we just went point by point and showed how the tabernacle in the wilderness reflected the creation in the Garden of Eden, even down to the 2 cherubim guarding the top of the ark, 2 cherubim guarding the entryway back to the Garden of Eden so that they couldn't get back into that presence. But it's the cloud that is guiding with the Spirit. Remember these 4 degelim. They're supposed to move according to the Ruach. Rashi says that's the interpretation. They move according to the Ruach, or the Spirit. We would say wind, and then we would say, yes, it is wind and it's Spirit. And so they're guided by the Spirit. They're guided by the cloud and the ark. It's encircling them in all directions. It's above them. It's below them. Paul even wrote to the Corinthians about how how we were all under the cloud. It's understood. It protected them on every side. And so the way that they're facing and encamping is going to affect the 4 directions. So we still have the question, why in the wilderness? There's more wordplay. The word chavatzelet, you can make it into a contraction of chaviv and tzel, which is chaviv, beloved, and tzel, shelter or shadow. And they say, this is taking you back to the tabernacle in the wilderness, that the free will offerings that they brought in, all the labor, the free will. Remember, this is the one time in the 40 years they didn't argue with each other. They were all had a generous heart, and they just gave and gave and gave until Moses says, you got to stop giving. It's too much. But the labor that they put into the Mishkan in the wilderness is something we need to remember. We don't necessarily need to remember in order to do all the other rebellious stuff, but in terms of looking at the wilderness and how they came together to build the shelter, to build the Mishkan. And remember, they built it through Betzalel's wisdom, and his name means in the shelter of El. So there's our tzel out of the rose. So Israel, it says, built a tzel le'el, a shelter for El. So when they did this, the Holy One could descend on the camp in a more powerful way. It would be more concentrated, obviously, in the Holy of Holies. But he says, I want to dwell among them. It's not as if the high priest is the only one who gets to experience my presence. He says, that will be where the concentration is that the average person can't take. But nevertheless, my presence will be among every one of these Israelites. So what we see emerging is the wilderness is a symbol for Israel itself. And that brings us to who is the wilderness? We're always asking, who is Israel? And why do we need to know? Well, the question is, who is the wilderness? And why do we need to know? But before we get to that, I know I'm messing with you. I'm building something here. This comes out of Midrash Rabbah, again, to Song of Songs 2:1. And it's another layer of chavatzelet, Sharon. HaShirim, it says, means that I uttered before him a song of praise at the Sea of Reeds through Moses, as it is written, then Moses and the children of Israel chose to sing this song to Hashem. Right, so they've just come out of Passover, and they're headed towards Shavuot. But remember, they came out at Passover, they went to Sukkot, and they entered into Sukkot of glory, or clouds of glory. It's thought that that's when the clouds enveloped them, right there, even before they're really leaving Egypt. They're encircled. And so when they arrive at the Sea of Reeds, they sing a song. And a song in Hebrew is a Shir. Shir. And that's why it's called Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. And when you add a nun to the end of a word, you create a permanent construct. Like if I called somebody, this is a horrible example, sheker. You told a lie. Sheker. But, or shakra, if you told a lie. But if I say shakran, that means you are a liar. And that's all that's going to come out of your mouth. You'll tell a lie when the truth would be easier. So it creates a permanence to the noun. And so they're saying HaSharon is the song. It's the enduring song. It's a song of the ages. It's saying, I am the rose of the song. Chavatzel, it is the rose. I am the rose of the song. And if you'll remember, there were certain psalms, it says, that were played upon the rose of the harp. Psalm 60 is one of those. It's played upon the rose of the harp. And it's one of, in the upcoming Becky book, I think we're almost done editing at this point, called 144,000 Harps. But what you see in the story of King David defeating Edom, he's going to destroy 12,000 of Edom. And that's what you do. If you're wanting to make a connection, if you want to say, okay, 12,000, 12,000, 12,000, 12,000 over here in Revelation with the tribes, if I want more context, I go back to the beginning and I key in 12,000 and I see what comes up. What comes up? David defeated 12,000 of the red one. Edom is called the red one. And by the way, Edom is thought to be the north now. He used to be in the south, down in Botzra. If you've been down at Tamar with us, you see how you're getting into those red mountains of Edom, and Petra's right over the mountains in Jordan. You can see the lights at night. But Edom and their tradition, at least by the 1st century, had become Rome. And we've done some lessons on that earlier this year. And so Edom is thought to represent Rome and the Roman kingdom. It's going to be the 4th kingdom of the beast. It's going to be the iron. But remember, it had toes. The beast had toes. And so there are descendants of Rome that are now associated with Edom in modern times. I don't know if I'll get kicked off YouTube for saying it or not. But at any rate, there is an Edom today. What's interesting, though, is, remember, Edom is in the north. And they say that King Messiah is concealed in Edom. Because when he comes from Edom with his garment stained with blood, he will begin marching and he will go south, which will be to the area of the Temple Mount. And that's where he will erect a 3rd temple. So it almost sounds like the rabbis knew more about Messiah than we do. When you get the implication of this prophecy. But the Psalm 60, it's a song about David's destruction of the red one, his destruction of Edom. So if we want to understand a little bit about King Messiah destroying Edom in the last days, that psalm is a perfect place to go. And again, they related it to the Passover from Egypt, and then they came and camped at Sukkot, and from there they went to Sinai to receive the Torah. Isaiah 30 talks about this time where the Messiah is going to come. He is going to take vengeance on his enemies, and he is going to restore Israel. Isaiah 30:29 says, "You will have songs in the night. It's when you kept the festival. And gladness of heart as one marches to the sound of the flute to go to the mountain of the Lord." So you hear the kind of the double entendre right there, the mountain of the Lord, Sinai, the mountain of the Lord, the Temple Mount, to the rock of Israel. And the Lord will cause his voice of authority to be heard, and the descending of his arm to be seen in fierce anger, and in the flame of a consuming fire, in cloudburst, downpour, and hailstones. Cloudburst, downpour, and hailstones are in the domain of the north wind. That's the direction of the eagle. And so when Messiah comes, he will come with cloudburst, downpour, and hailstones. Remember when we saw those before, though? Shavuot at Mount Sinai. They saw the sounds, they saw the flashing lightning, but they also saw the hail. It talks about the moisture that rained down. Everything in the world was happening around that mountain. And so it kind of gives you that picture of the winds and the power that is behind those winds, and what kind of spiritual authority it would take to discipline these winds. And so this song of praise, that's this Sharon that they're talking about, it's not just at the Sea of Reeds as they march to the mountain, but they're also pointing it back, like Isaiah, to the Passover. So remember the Passover? When you didn't know what was going to happen the next morning, but you sang the Hallel. Every year we don't sing it, we say the Hallel, which is what, Psalm 113 through 118?
Yes.
And that's where that came from, those songs of the night. So there's a harmonization with these four winds to facilitate Israel's deliverance. With the east wind, we've got this association with the plagues. It's always a hot wind. The heat will come from the east. It's a destroying heat. Unless it's a blessing, it will come as light. Same thing with the west. It's darkness. Well, with darkness, you can have coolness. It can be a blessing. But with darkness, you can also have elevated dark spiritual forces. That's why you needed Ephraim's division on the west to stand against. When I actually read it in Hebrew, it shocked me a little bit what it said. But there are dark spiritual forces, and it was the job of Ephraim to stand together and to withstand that west wind. We know Messiah came from the north, but then the tribe of Reuven in the south, those are showers and dew. Dew is associated with resurrection. And so you've got this extreme of the north, and you've got these gentle showers of the south, unless what you need is rain. I mean, lots of rain. You don't need dew and a little shower, in July. You need a little more on that garden to get it in. So it said that Israel will sing the song of praise upon the messianic redemption when Messiah arouses from the north. And the song they will sing will resemble the song they sang on the night of Pesach in Egypt. They will sing the Hallel, or something very like the Hallel, which is, it's no accident that we sing it every year. It's prophetic. But these four winds are displaying spiritual authority. So the Hallel, Psalm 113 through 118, is the HaShirim. It's one explanation of HaShirim. It's a permanent song. It's a song that will be sung forever and ever and ever.
On open festivals.
And his mercy endures forever. So it's this rose, and they see it as an unopened rose. A rose will be closed up really tight, and it's hard for the inside to get the dew. until it starts to open. When it starts to open, it can get the dew of heaven. The dew of heaven is resurrection, and it comes from the south. And so this Hallel, this HaShirim, this eternal song, it's going to be sung Passover after Passover. In fact, we could have said it tonight. Scanning through the liturgy, we could have said it tonight. Maybe we can do it tomorrow. So at these 3 festivals, you're going to sing Hallel, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. You are singing HaShirim in the shadow of the serpent and the 4 beast kingdoms. You're singing it in the shadow of the kingdoms. You're hidden out there among the nations. You're in the shadow of those kingdoms. You're in the shadow of the nations where you are. And they say, nevertheless, sing the Hallel. Sing the song. And they say, it's like saying this. Tomorrow, when the Holy One redeems me, because remember, they did this when they had their Passover in Egypt. Tomorrow, when the Holy One redeems me from the shadow of these foreign kingdoms, I will be saturated with showers and dew and blossom forth like a rose and utter before him a new song of praise. Sing to the Lord a new song, for he has done wonders. His own right hand and holy arm have helped him. So that rose opening up in the desert is like a picture of Israel itself. So who is the wilderness? Israel. They say the wilderness states, I am the wilderness and I am beloved of God. When you break down the Song of Songs, 2:1, the wilderness says, I am beloved of God. For all the good things of the world are concealed within me. As it is stated, in the wilderness, I will set the cedar, acacia, myrtle, and pine tree. I will place the cypress, fir, and box tree together in a desert. And we know that trees are symbols of human beings in Scripture. There are human beings being set in a wilderness. That's Isaiah 41:19. And this is, again, coming out of the Midrash, commenting on Isaiah. The Holy One, blessed is he, gave them to me, these trees, so that they would be safeguarded within me. When the Holy One will request them from me, I shall return to him his deposit without anything missing. And I will be saturated and blossom like a rose and produce those things and utter before him a song of praise, as it is stated in Isaiah 35:1. The wilderness and the wasteland will rejoice over them. The desert will be glad and blossom like a rose. Who is the wilderness? Israel is the wilderness that's going to utter a song of praise before him. All the things are concealed in the wilderness. And so even think of sing, O barren one. Come and sing a joyful song. Well, what is the wilderness? She's barren. In fact, if you wanted to read the whole chapter of Isaiah 54, it would build a beautiful picture for you because it explains the prophecy of Israel's blossoming in detail. Israel is the wilderness. And when she begins to bloom, it's a sign that King Messiah is arousing from his dormancy in Edom to begin the final redemption. Who is this that comes from Botzrah? And so I figured it out. Those of you who were with us at the Parade of the Nations at Sukkot a couple years ago, you saw the reaction. We had a banner, that banner. And it had the song of the Erevah from Isaiah 35 printed on it in English and also in Hebrew. And those Israelis would see it and they would go nuts They would jerk on somebody else, like, come look at this, come look at this, look, look. They were doing their cameras. They were waving. It was unreal. We had other banners. That's the banner that they all wanted a picture of. And then later somebody explained to me, well, when they make Aliyah, when they first come to Israel, they teach them this song, the song of the Arava. I just didn't make the connection until this week, because they are the wilderness. We are the wilderness. I don't know that they recognize us as the wilderness, but they knew that we recognized them as the wilderness that had begun to blossom, the rose that had started to open up. And because they were in their land, we know that King Messiah is arousing out of dormancy in Edom to begin the final redemption. They could see, I don't know that every person, I don't know how many thousand there were in that parade. I don't think I'd want to count. And I can't even begin to tell you how tired I was afterward. Yeah. But it was worth every step. It was worth the heat. It was worth the standing. It was worth the blisters. It was worth anything I endured that day to make that march. Because now I understand this. I get it. There's so much support from even secular Israelis, all the way from secular Israelis to the Orthodox. We saw everything lining the route of that parade and reacting. It's like they couldn't believe we were there, and we couldn't believe they were there. It's like, who would come watch a bunch of crazy people from all over the world march through the streets on the hottest day of the year? Yeah, really. And they were, I don't even know how to describe it to you. You just have to be there to understand how much they loved us. Yeah. And so Hosea says, and Hosea 1:1 through 2:22. Oh, that was the Haftorah. Hosea 2:3. I will also make her like a wilderness. I'll make her like a desert land. And then he says in 2:13, I will take back my grain at harvest time and my new wine. There's your new wine in its season. I will also put an end to all her gaiety, her feasts, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and all her festal assemblies. Apparently, she's been off in some new moons and some Sabbaths and some festal assemblies that need to be ripped out of her before she will open up and begin to bloom like a rose. I will punish her for the days of the Baals, when she used to misspell sacrifices to them and adorn herself with earrings and jewelry and follow her lovers, so that she forgot me, declares the Lord. Therefore, behold, I will allure her, bring her into the wilderness, and speak kindly to her. And then I will give her vineyards from there. Why did he take other feasts and Sabbaths away from us? Our wilderness? He's wanting to open us up. He's wanting to open us up so that we can be a light to the nations. That's our job, no matter where we are. And so when we get to Revelation 12:6, it says, then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. But the two wings of a great eagle were given to the woman. Who is that? King Messiah, coming from the north, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time, times, and half a time, away from the presence of the serpent. And remember, if we're taking it back in time to Mount Sinai, the serpent is Pharaoh, and his offspring are the four beast kingdoms: Babylon, Persia, Media, Greece, Rome. So King Messiah is what John's prophesying of. He's going to take the woman. He's going to take Israel away from the serpent, away from the nations of the world. And she's going to start to blossom in the wilderness. And she's going to receive the dew of heaven, which is the resurrection, which makes sense now, where he says to the north, give them up, and to the south, don't hold back. Only Messiah can do that, because there's a natural law that says there is a prevailing wind. One is stronger at any given season, time, and so forth. And only King Messiah, remember, the only one who could complete the north and say, I am God. I am this perfect representation of the Creator. Only King Messiah can do that. Only he can take two opposite winds and have them act simultaneously toward the same blessing and purpose. Which explains why all these folks have been finding their way down to the wilderness of Zin for Sukkot or Pesach. There's some folks at Pesach down in the wilderness. And there's some folks marching in the Parade of Nations. There's some folks down in the wilderness. Randy Heaton sent me that one. I think we were hiking out to the spring. There's some folks.
They're not seeing it yet.
The only place you smile. There's some folks from the colder northern climes down in the Arava. There's some folks that found their way to the burial place of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah. There's some good folks from Oklahoma that found their way to Jerusalem. There's some folks that found the trail out to the Zin wilderness. And so what you're seeing there with your natural eye is not what's there. You know what's concealed in these people? The trees of blessing. They're the roses. I think that's why we're hanging out down there. It's because Israelis understand the song of the Arava, that King Messiah is going to arouse. Ephraim, it says, will come trembling from the west. He will say to the north, give them up. To the south, don't hold back. Judah's already there. It says, when they hear that lion roaring from the east, they'll come home. Judah's been roaring a little. Judah needs to roar a lot louder. And I think Judah will roar a lot louder when Messiah starts marching. And there is Miriam's spring in the desert. And here's the song of the Arava. The wilderness and the desert will be glad, and the Arava will rejoice and blossom. This translation says the crocus. For waters will break forth in the wilderness and streams in the Arava. Just like that. Y'all want to sing it? I lost Hermina. She's my singing part. There she went.
She's the one that knows it.
You want to sing it? Come sing it with me.
I can sing back here.
You got to blossom like a rose. Yes, assume midbar vetzia. Vetagel, tagel, arava.
ותפרק כחבצלת, ותפרק כחבצלת. כי נבקעו במדבר מים, ונחולים בערבה. כי נבקעו במדבר מים, ונחולים בערבה.
So now do you know why it was given in the wilderness? Would you like to do the Aaronic benediction for these folks? Because I know we're going to have to cut them. Well, I think we could let the music play. I'll just trim it. Would you like to do their Aaronic benediction?
I can.
Okay.
There's no version like, to me, you may feel the same way, like the Rico version. I love the way he does the Aaronic benediction. It just, I don't know, it just connects with me. And so that's the one I will be using. Let me get it. Probably should know this, but when you get old, your mind slips. If you'll stand. Yivarekeka Adonai Ve'yishmereka Yael Adonai Panav Elecha Vihuneka Yisa Adonai Panav Elecha Ve'asem Leka Shalom. May Adonai bless you and keep you. May Adonai make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May Adonai lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. So they shall put my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. Amen.